Okay, cool. So just what is the takeaway from last week? So what made sense to you in terms of what we spoke about?
What made sense to me is about understanding the size of the glute and let's call it the height of the glute is close to the back, and the size of the glute and the magnitude of the glute, and that's how to actually engage it properly. So when I ran on Saturday, I ran very well, very good time, and I really warmed the glute up properly and got it working first. So that really made quite a very big difference. Certainly the little effort here on the side is a lot better than it was. It's still a little bit niggly, but it's getting a lot better. So I certainly feel like I'm on the right path of working the glute max and reducing the load that the glute
Need
takes.
Okay.
Then also, I was very sore after the last session, but in a muscle sore type of way.
Where?
Lower back here.
Okay.
So that's.
But was the pain like an active pain?
Yeah, it was like a muscle, like a sore muscle, sore legs from overworking it.
It wasn't a twingy pain that sort of wraps around the back?
No spasm, nothing like that.
All right, cool.
It was rather funny because then you worked quite hard.
Okay.
I felt like I forgot. So the feeling I got out of it was that I was sore for about 3 days afterwards, 4 days afterwards. The feeling I got was I'm not handing over, or that the back was doing too much work, or either the back was doing too much work, or my core wasn't engaging enough, or that means work, my core was okay. So I'm not quite sure.
Okay.
But maybe I'm overthinking it.
So, I mean, just to recap on what we spoke about last week, for simplicity purposes, 3 segments: leg, pelvis or hip, and back.
Yes.
So 1, 2, 3. Traditionally, you've been moving with your pelvis stuck to your legs, and then the movement comes too much through the back, and that's what causes lower back pain, inactivity in the glutes, and then the hamstrings to sort of seize up and tighten. Whereas what I've been trying to promote now is getting a little bit more of an independence between your leg and the pelvis, or your leg and the hip,
Yes.
so that you're moving through the hip joint. But in order to do that, you need to keep your spine stabilized to your pelvis so that they move as one segment. What that then therefore requires is good core activation, good lumbar extensions or good lower back activation. And then in order to get that whole pulley system working properly, you're getting your glute max and your hamstrings working. Glute med, yeah, for sure. Quads, yeah, important stuff. But just that general, that hip pivot action going, just as a general theme, and then taking that into activity on a day-to-day basis, and running, it just happens a little bit more naturally. I think also just your previous understanding of running is to be quite tight in the core, which has resulted in a potential posterior tuck of the pelvis. So if you over tight here, you pull the hips forward, so you're a little bit running like a whippet. Those dogs with the tails that go in the little backs that curve round. So if you're running with this too shortened, this is not active enough, so you end up working too much into core, into quads, and you neglecting the lower back and the glutes. Whereas if you just keep everything a little bit straighter and more stable, so that there's a balance between activation in your stomach and your back and your hamstrings and your glutes and your quads, and everything's working together, you're going to be more optimal in movement. And I think just in your case, that where the breakdowns happen is glute, med, and lumbar extension. And the core strength's not bad. It's okay.
Because I've always considered when I run, I have a strong core, and I thought everything else is sorted out. But one of the things from last week is what I discovered is as long as I sort that out, the rest sort of follows. Where I activate the glute max and concentrate on that.
Yeah.
The core sort of comes naturally with it.
Yeah. Also, just remember that your core activation doesn't necessarily need to be the representation of closing up too tightly in here. Your core activation can be, you can be completely open and active at the same time. Does that make sense? So you can be fully extended and still active through the core, but things can still work relatively hard. So you can get good pelvic movement and good spinal movement with the core still being active. So it's not necessarily a feeling of closing and over-activating closing everything up because it pulls you into a sort of incorrect position. So you can be active to the core still, but in a more open sort of posture. Makes sense?
Yes, I didn't realize that.
But I think what clicks it over is that just the cue of squeezing the pencil between the butt cheeks, it does help. It does stand you a little bit more upright.
Yes.
And then it ends up becoming more of a balance between core and glutes together working. Yeah. Just then lastly, before we start, I think the other principle of getting your core to activate is that you don't necessarily need to clench it up and close it up and hold your breath necessarily, or the feeling of creating that it's almost it's called a Valsalva maneuver. So a Valsalva maneuver is when you and you hold your breath in order to create pressure, to create that intra-abdominal pressure, which is not, it's a artificial way of creating stability within the abdomen, and the core. Whereas it's better to be able to retain your breathing, but then activate in a slightly different way. So instead of having the feeling of core activation through brace, I'm going to get punched, you can activate the core more through feeling like you're going to get punched, but you're still keeping the air moving and, squeezing the pencil between the bum cheeks, and also get a feeling of almost stopping yourself from peeing, that deep pelvic floor activation. So what that allows you to do is to keep core activation and move at the same time. So you create independence of your body parts.
Yes, 100%.
So I think just keep that theme going, especially when we start working into your squat-based movements, which we'll do some of today, and then your sit-up-based movements. Obviously, we'll bear in mind gravity is going to be acting differently. So I want to run through references and examples of each, and we just want to make sure that the same theme of the muscles is working, but the body is just going to be in a slightly different orientation due to gravity. Because gravity will always go there. Yes. So if you're lying on your back, gravity is going to be splaying you open. And it's dropping your feet towards the ground. Gravity is naturally going to hold you open, so you're going to need to close. Whereas in your squat-based position, the gravity is going to naturally pull you into a closed position, so you're going to need to open up against gravity. When you're standing up straight, you need to just have a gentle balance of the two.
Yes, okay.
And then taking that into running, obviously, is that if you're running fast, your body angle is going to be over slightly. So your center of mass is going to be slightly in front of your feet because you're in a propulsive phase. So you're going to be working slightly differently as opposed to when you're running slower, when your center of mass is more underneath your feet. There's a subtle difference, but
100%.
I think having the understanding of what's going on will definitely help.
I think also one thing that helps, I've noticed, is also just keeping it up.
Yeah.
And also the thing you showed me simply by standing against the flat wall, head, shoulders.
Yeah, so it's that plumb line, getting that plumb line concept going.
Just being conscious of that when you're walking or running or doing whatever.
Cool. All right, cool. Okay, so I think sorry?
That was very helpful.
The plumb line. Look, it's just someone grabbing the crown of your head and gently yanking you up. Just elongates your spine nice and straight, and then we can basically move from there. All right, cool. Okay, so let's start. I just want to take neutral posture and I want to put it on the floor. So let's lie down for me on your back. Okay. So let's get your knees up like that, so everything's at 90 degrees. Okay, so the spine's nice and straight. Let's set the head like you are being pulled up from the crown. Okay, and now without activating anything, I want you just to drop your heels towards the floor. Okay, so your heels is in your whole leg. So keeping your knees at 90 degrees and just dropping everything down without activating. You're going to feel naturally that the weight or the pull of gravity is going to pull into your lower back.
Yes.
So it's going to pull you open.
Yes.
So in this position, you're going to need to activate into your core to keep yourself, to counter, to keep yourself stable. So when you drop down and coming up. Okay. So that's okay. Down. So that's very much a typical
Yes.
supine Pilates-based movement where you're going to need to activate into the core to prevent the weight of gravity pulling on your legs, yanking into your lower back. Yeah?
100%.
Okay. So just take that up a level now. So we will do a hip lift where don't think about activating anything and just pull your, just yank your hips up into the air. Okay. Can you feel naturally gravity is going to want to pull your hips down, right?
Yeah.
So that's going to naturally pull into your lower back.
Yeah.
So the only way to counter that is then to activate your abdominals. So squeeze your stomach and squeeze your butt. And then you're going to just tuck the hip slightly to pull the tailbone up towards the roof in order to counter that. Okay, so you got, can you feel the counters that need to happen within the body? Okay, let's come down again. Okay, if we go up into a standing position. So if you're standing and don't think about activating anything and just bend, just hang forward like that. Can you feel naturally how gravity will pull on the upper body and pull into your back? And your hamstrings to a degree, but it's going to be predominantly in the back. So in order to get the feeling that you're activating against that movement is to then activate your back muscles to pull you up straight so that you basically connect your spine to your pelvis and that you move the pull more onto your hamstrings as opposed to your back. Okay, so come up for me. So it ends up being a bit of a two-piece movement. So you're literally folding yourself in half by stabilizing your core, stabilizing your back. So you create a cylinder or a column around your spine, that you stabilize the spine onto your hip, and that when you go forward, you create a pulley through your hips, and that the pulley, what governs the pulley is your hamstrings.
Right.
Yeah, not bad. What you could do, though, is just activate slightly more into the back. So just pull yourself up just a fraction more. So do you want to feel active there? Okay, and come up for me. Okay, come all the way up. So there's a very, very slight difference between being there, where you've got that little bit of collapse, and being just slightly extended. Now, I would almost want to be slightly extended as opposed to neutral, because neutral might work into flexion, and that's not going to pull into my back. So I'd rather just activate into my back a little bit more to keep my spinal extensors active so that I'm almost two-piece. I'm just going to create a strict hinge at my hip.
So to make that lastable activation, that's purely the back muscles here that you should feel working.
Yes. So your back muscles, all of them, working the whole way down the spine onto the pelvis, are active just to keep your spine connected to your sacrum or to your pelvis or to your hips. And that the muscles that do the work to pull you up are your hamstrings. Yeah, not bad. If I had to be hypercritical, I'd want to get you just to try and activate a little bit more in the lumbar area. So the activation is good in the middle of the back, in the upper part of the back, but it's a little bit lacking just over here. So you're still getting a slight collapse here, although you are activating up here. So although the middle and upper back are well activating, that the lower back is still slightly collapsing, fractionally.
So you receive a bit more of both.
So over here, I want more extension. So it's almost like you're going to push the hips back ever so slightly, and then don't think about going as far forward. So you want to try and feel protection and activation in the lumbar part of the back.
About as much as I can do there.
It's fine? Okay, cool. Now, in order to just take that a bit further, then we now get back into the squat-based position where you can bend the knees. That obviously will give you a little bit of forgiveness in terms of how far down you're able to go. So if you bend at the knee, you're now able to get more sort of into a typical squat-based movement. And that will now enable you to fully activate into your glute max. So if you do that sit to stand or a squat-based or a deadlift-based movement where your heels stay connected to the floor, the spine's extended, so the abdominals are activated, the back muscles are all extended, and then you break at the hip and then you push back slightly. So you can just put the hands maybe over here, fold the arms in front of you, and then just dropping down and then driving up through the heel.
Almost feel like it's not enough extension.
Where? In the lower part?
Yeah.
So that's the sort of the secret sauce here. That's the key, is to try and get that rock over movement through the hip. It boils down to pelvic positioning. So you can, theoretically, and practically, I guess, you can get down to this position with a pelvis that's slightly posteriorly tucked, but a spine that's still active. But my activation is coming from middle and upper back, but my lower back is not active. So I've still had a slightly forward weight shift into my knees, into my quads, and my pelvis is slightly posteriorly rotated. Whereas if I get the activation, a decent activation in my lumbar spine, I can you see, I can anteriorly rotate this. Shift the weight onto my heel, which will allow my glutes to activate and my lower back. All the while, my core can stay active through this whole movement. But it's again this pelvic orientation position of getting it there. Because once you're there, you can get a little bit further. So you can try to create more of a hip hinge. But if the pelvis is slightly posteriorly tucked, you're going to struggle. The hip hinge is not happening. It cannot happen. But as soon as you're there, the hip hinge can happen. So it's almost a feeling of keeping the weight on the heel, pushing the butt backwards, and then trying to get that feeling of activation over here more in the lower part of the back. This was the part last week that you struggled a bit with.
Yes.
Just that's this concept of that the activation is throughout the entire spine.
Yes.
I mean, it's 80% better, but it's that last 20% is going to come from those, that little area around the sacroiliac joints.
So the glute and everything works, this whole chain works all in one go together?
Mostly, yeah. So let's just assume that the spine will act as one unit, as one stable unit. We can worry a little bit later about spinal articulation, for sure, but for the purposes of this exercise, let's just keep the spine as one column or one cylinder, and that wants to connect to the sacrum. And the only way it can connect, that's it there. The only way it can connect to the sacrum is through activation along the junction between the spine and the sacrum, which are the lower back muscles.
Okay. So I get the feeling that what I've been doing today that has been working.
Yes.
Last little bit.
Yeah, so the 75% of the upper segment. So if I consider your spine starting at the base of your head and ending at your L5 connection to your sacrum, which is just at the level of your butt. So below your head to your butt, it's assume that's your spine, right? I would consider that 80% of the upper part of that segment is working well, but the lower 20% is still left wanting in terms of its ability to activate, to get that spine as one stable column. That's it. So it's pretty good up until the hips are more or less about to be in line with the knees. As you go below the knees, then you develop a bit of butt wink. You know what butt wink is? So butt winks when your butt tucks. It's a butt tuck. So your butt in a wink. It comes under. It's like because then you're either lacking the hamstring stability or the lumbar strength to be able to keep you in an extended position. So what ends up happening is you go to the forward and then the butt winks. Forward, yeah. So you want to try and go to the level at which your butt does not wink. So straight. So wherever that level is for you, stop, come up. Yeah, it's not bad. Decent, yeah. Cool, you can come up. So keep the weights on the heel to get that right, but that's good, that's good. Let's keep the hip dropping down to more or less in line with the knee. Yeah, that's much better. Nailing it.
Just feels so natural to do this.
Want to pull the hips forward.